brains, the closer we come to finding the location of consciousness. And while there's been fantastic work at mapping neural connections and understanding more and more about the brain and memory, what we find is that we still don't know where consciousness is. Now, a non-localized picture is the picture of consciousness on which we're converging now, which is to say that consciousness does not seem to be strictly produced by the brain. It involves the brain, but there's something much deeper going on here. Consciousness may not be localized to our bodies, but may be a fundamental feature of the physical world in which we live.
We can see an example of consciousness technology in the Mind Lamp, developed by Celeron. This prototype integrates a random number generator into a color-changing light. Think of a color, and the lamp turns that color.
Well, that's what I actually was doing. First, I was doing sunset.
Oh, cool.
Consciousness, this faculty of being sentient, awake, is not limited to our brain waves or our bodies, but in fact transcends the limits of space-time. It's an unbounded field of awareness. And that is true whether you recognize it or not. Interestingly, it doesn't matter if you intellectualize it. That is the reality of it that has been proven through scientific studies, such as Dr. John's work at Princeton, where they would have people put their awareness on a random number generator that's spitting out zeros and ones randomly, and would intend to shift it, say, towards zeros, and it would shift without any linear wires, just their thought.
Essentially what a random number generator does is it looks at something intrinsically random in the physical world, typically a quantum process, and it converts those into a string of ones and zeros. So you can think of it kind of like a coin flipper where heads is 1 and tails is 0. Now if you collect a large enough sample size, you find a 50-50 distribution of these ones and zeros, meaning physical reality is behaving the way it should. Well, if you get somebody in front of the machine and you ask them to use their intention to mean shift the thing to more ones or more zeros, what you find is that there's, not all the time, but often a significant mean shift in the direction of their intention. Now that's a very simple experiment, but the implications are absolutely profound. Consciousness does not seem to be just an illusion or just a localized phenomena, but that it does have some sort of capabilities to affect the probabilities at the deepest layer of reality, down in the basement layer of the quantum world somehow.
The best way to understand non-locality is to understand that in both physics and in consciousness, there is a connection that exists amongst all things, from photons to people to awareness, that isn't limited by space and time per se, that are woven within each other. Dr. Emoto, the Japanese scientist, began to experiment with water and people putting their intent on the water. And he did photography that would show these different crystalline structures. If it was a very negative emotion, the crystals would be all dissonant. But when it was highly ordered conscious or love, the structures were these beautiful ordered structures that he would photograph. And this was repeated by other scientists. Water has a crystalline component, but it's also tied into, like all matter in space and time in the universe, to this consciousness force field. If you enter into just a quiet state of consciousness and intend something very positive, it literally altered the structure of the water itself.
There was an unpublished experiment that we did at the Pear Lab, which we called Plant RNG. You have a room with no windows, and you have a house plant that needs light to grow. You have a single growing light up on the roof. The growing light can turn in one of 4 quadrants, and which quadrant that light is showing is controlled by a random number generator. So you put the plant in one corner of the room. The light has an equal chance of shining in all 4 quadrants. But you give it enough time, and what you find is the light actually shines far more often on the plant than on the other coordinates. It's as though life itself, even life or consciousness in something as simple as a houseplant, bends probabilities in the physical world in the direction of what it needs, in the direction of its growth and its evolution. I see that experiment as profound because it shows to me what consciousness does in the world.